Hey y'all, welcome back to Our Road Less Traveled, and I'm going to make this short. It's going to be a recap of everything that we found out about the South Dakota thing. I keep getting tons of comments and questions on it, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the information that I've gotten on the background on it and share that with you guys. All right, so to recap what happened, Maria and I lived in Alabama, and when I took a new job, and this is very important because I want y'all to hear this and resonate, so I quit getting these comments. Maria and I sold everything that we owned in Alabama, and we moved into our fifth wheel and had planned on moving to South Dakota to set up our residency, which we did. We did it in accordance with South Dakota law. We got our driver's license and we got our plates. So for those of y'all telling me, just go back to your home state, South Dakota was our home state. That's where we had planned on making our lives from then on, in between our RV travels. South Dakota. 9 months in, we get a call from my employer saying that South Dakota is not accepting the unemployment that's being paid on my behalf. Now, employers have to pay unemployment. It's a federal rule, federal law. Now, this is where it gets complicated because there's two sets of tax law that are in play here. There's the state tax law and there's the federal tax law. Now, we are not talking income tax. We're talking unemployment at this point. We have the Department of Labor from South Dakota refusing the unemployment tax, trying to be paid on my behalf. Now, again, I am not unemployed. This is a federal mandate that every employer has to pay unemployment tax in case the employee does become unemployed. Then they go back to the state that they're a resident of or that they did work in, and they file an unemployment claim, and they get their unemployment benefits. I am in no way, shape, form, or fashion unemployed. This is where our address comes into play. The federal rules that were passed down to the states and asked to implement go into a bunch of legalese on within a state and without a state, meaning work performed inside the boundaries of the state versus work performed outside the boundaries of a state. Now, when you work at a physical location, and let's say company ABC that's on Main Street in Pierre, South Dakota, you physically work inside the state of South Dakota. You're physically living inside the state of South Dakota. And that proves that your work is being performed within the state of South Dakota. Address is sent to the South Dakota Department of Labor. They validate the physical address. They accept unemployment payments based on that physical address. In our case, we used Escapees, which was a mail forwarding address. It physically did not exist. It existed virtually. Then around 600 people claimed that same address, and the Department of Labor started looking at how their state law is implementing the federal IRS tax code and found that those addresses were not able to meet the federal guidelines of a physical address because they existed virtually. If you want to go look up the South Dakota laws on this, and I'm reading from my computer here, it is the South Dakota Codified Law 61-1-26 and 27. And that is how they deem whether or not your work is able to be done inside the state. Now, because our address was virtual and not physical, the litmus test is, can you put a keyboard and mouse down to do your job? Now, the fact is, our address was virtual. I couldn't prove that. So in lieu of being able to prove that you're doing work inside a state, the states are supposed to revert back to the federal law. All right, so what they're referring to is called the Unemployment Insurance Program Letter Number 20-04. It was issued on May 10th of 2004 for the program year of 2023, or the fiscal year of 2024, and in it includes the localization of work provisions, which is what governs how you certify whether a person works in a state or out of a state for the reasons of unemployment. All right, so I'm going to read an example from that localization PDF, and you can go find this on the Federal Department of Labor. The example is given. A resident of New York was hired as a technical specialist for a financial information provider. All services were performed in the state of New York for 2 years, after which the employee moved to Florida because her husband had changed jobs. Since the employer had invested time and money in training in this individual, they agreed to allow her to telecommute from Florida. After the relocation took place, all of her assignments and work products were communicated via the internet. Since the employee is now performing all duties in Florida, even though the employer is located in New York, her services were localized in Florida and subject to Florida law. Therefore, all wages. I had a bunch of verbal conversations with South Dakota Department of Labor, the senior staff attorney, Gerald McCabe, for the state of South Dakota, and I even filed a Freedom of Information Act for the reason why they were saying our address was no longer valid and what they were using as a basis to do that. My FOIA request was rejected. I received an email telling me it was rejected, and that's what continued on with our discussion, and that's when they stated that they were using South Dakota law, Section 21 or Section 60-1-26 and 27, that defines work, whether it's in a state or outside of a state. Here's how it went down for us. They applied our address to the test, found that it did not meet the requirements as a physical address. Therefore, my company was not allowed to pay into the unemployment system, and they have 3 options at that point. If you can't pay into the state that you're, quote, doing the work for, then your employer has the option to pay that tax in your home state. We did not have a home state at that point because it was South Dakota. We had given up our residency and domicile in Alabama. The third option that the IRS gives you is that the company can then pay the unemployment and collect income tax if the state charges it in the state where the entity is registered, has a physical presence, or a business license. We were lucky in that the company I work for also has an office in Texas, which is why we moved to Texas. It didn't have anything to do with being mad at South Dakota. So we got a physical address in Texas. We got our driver's license, everything changed. We sent that up to the company. The company put that in my HR file. Now they have proof that we have a physical address. They sent that information to the Texas Department of Labor. They certified the physical address, and we got everything in Texas. Now let's discuss some of these comments that people have got, quite frankly, and pardon my language, just red-assed over. For those of y'all that think we were using South Dakota, you could absolutely not be any further from the truth. The first one is property tax. Everybody that said we're not paying property tax, guess what? Only people that own property pay property tax. People that rent don't pay it. People that are homeless don't pay it. I don't know what the population of South Dakota is. I imagine it's probably 1 million or slightly thereunder. But I guarantee you 100% of the people that live in South Dakota aren't paying property tax. Campgrounds charge a flat fee because they're the owners of the land. They pay the property tax. So indirectly, when you rent a space in a campground, you're covering the cost of that yearly property tax. The other thing I want to bring up, South Dakota property tax, some of y'all may be pretty hot about how high it is, but functionally it's 1.04% of the assessed value of your property. So if you have a $200,000 house, you're paying $2,000 a year in property tax. Here's the funny thing on property tax. Everybody's so ticked off at us for using South Dakota and not paying property tax because it's so high. Did you know that in the state of South Dakota, if you're 65 years or older, you don't pay property tax? If you're disabled, in accordance with the definition of the Social Security Administration Act, you don't pay property tax. Did you know that if you are an unmarried widow or widower, you don't have to pay property tax? So the fact that you have maybe 12,000 people registered as RVers that transient the state aren't paying property tax, you need to get pissed at somebody else. The next thing is don't use our roads and because you're not paying for them. Well, the fact is we are. And South Dakota collects a fuel tax on everything from biodiesel to gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, liquid natural gas, propane, all of it. There's a tax on it. Those funds go to fund your roads. So how does South Dakota fund itself? Well, the fact of the matter is they fund it through a sales tax, and there's two types of sales tax. There's a state sales tax and there's a localized sales tax. RVers, when they're in your state, guess what? Tax on everything from food to clothes, everything they buy while they're in the state. The same stuff that you guys are buying, they're paying for it. Those tax dollars are going back into your community. They're paying sales. That's that for the comments. I hope this wraps this up and puts it to bed. I hope some of you have learned a little something. And I really hope before you comment on this, you'll go do a little bit of research, because I'm not unemployed. We're not freeloading. When we were in South Dakota, we were pumping tax dollars into the local economy, the same as everybody else. When we used the roads, we were paying for it with the fuel that we were purchasing. When we stayed in campgrounds, we were helping pay the property tax of the landowners. So we weren't using South Dakota and getting over on anybody or dodging anything or any of that. We still pay federal income tax. You know, the difference is now we do it in Texas simply because the place I worked didn't have a resident or a physical address in South Dakota. If you have any additional questions or comments or concerns, please by all means put them in the content or in the comments. I will try and provide a link to each one of these documents so that you can go read them for yourself. But please don't leave me a comment and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. That's it for this week, and we will get back to normal programming next week, which we've got some pretty cool things to add on. We're going to do a couple modifications to the rig, and then we've got a few things that we've seen in the local area. And hopefully this gives y'all a better view of this. Hopefully these clouds and everything and rain push out of here and we have a better day.